Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're really diving into something special, excerpts from Rumi's Masnavi, Book 1. And look, this isn't just some dusty old text. We think it's a pretty profound guide for, understanding ourselves. So our mission, as always, is to pull out those key nuggets of wisdom. We're talking symbols, metaphors, spiritual lessons. And we want to connect these insights, these timeless ideas from Rumi directly to your life, your personal growth, show how it's practical, really.
That's exactly it. Rumi, in the Masnavi, he's not just telling stories. He's like this master guide to the soul, right? And its connection to the divine. His poetry just invites you to look deeper, beyond the surface. And, well, that's what we're aiming for today, a proper deep dive.
Okay, let's jump right in. There's this really striking opening line in the source material we have. Rumi says, "To leave the bow, the arrow must be straight. It then won't fail to fly and penetrate." Straight away, I thought, okay, focus, clarity. But what's Rumi really getting at with this straightness? Why is it so vital?
Well, it's immediately this foundational metaphor, isn't it? For inner alignment, for purpose. The arrow's straightness. It's not just physical. It's about its intention, its whole being, really. He links this straight to the idea of the greater jihad. He contrasts the small jihad, which is often seen as like outward battles, with this jihad of a much greater kind. And he defines that as the war inside our soul. So that's straightness. It's about aligning your inner self, your soul, your purpose. The core idea is that real effectiveness, like that arrow hitting its mark, it comes from inner alignment.
Like clarity.
That really shifts the focus inward, doesn't it? And then he drops this line that feels almost counterintuitive today. Don't overrate the lion which can kill. The one who breaks himself is greater still. Breaking himself, what does that mean for strength? Right? It totally challenges our usual ideas of power. But Rumi isn't saying be weak. He's elevating self-mastery, humility, as a much greater win than any external fight. To break himself means breaking the ego, right? Shedding those illusions, overcoming the self-centered stuff that blinds us. And his inner strength, he says, if it comes with strength from God, well, it can do impossible things, like uproot Mount Quaff with just a pin. So it's about conquering yourself, your own limits, not dominating others. That's the real strength Rumi's pointing to.
Okay, that idea of inner strength. It flows perfectly into this next story. The emissary from Byzantium, looking for Omar, the Caliph. The emissary expects, a big palace, a symbol of power. The text says he asks, "The Caliph's palace, please show me the way." What does Rumi actually show us about Omar's true power?
Yeah, Rumi uses Omar to just completely turn our ideas of power and wealth upside down. The emissary is told he doesn't have a palace, except his soul, illuminated like pure gold. His well-earned fame as leader is secure, though he lives in a hut just like the poor. See, it's not about the stuff, the buildings. It's about his inner state, this enlightened soul. Omar's real palace is his soul. That gives him way more authority than any fancy building could. So the takeaway is real influence, real leadership. It comes from inner purity, spiritual richness, not just showing off wealth.
And Rumi makes it so clear why we might miss that. Like the emissary, like us, he uses that powerful metaphor, the heart's eye blind because of one stray hair. Yes, how can you see a palace of this kind when one stray hair has made your heart's eye blind?
It really makes you pause, What little things, what stray hairs might be blinding your heart's eye? That's such a critical point. Rumi's basically calling us to clean up our inner world to see properly. He says, rid your heart's eye of hair, to have a prayer of seeing this great caliph's palace there. That stray hair represents our worldly desires, attachments, the ego. Rumi often calls it lust. And then he says it straight out. Whoever soul is free from lust has found admittance to God's kingdom's hallowed ground. So the insight is clear. If you want to see what's truly valuable, truly spiritual, you got to clear out the inner clutter first.
So this clear inner vision, it actually changes how we experience everything. Rumi says Muhammad, once he was purged of fire and smoke's last trace, whichever way he turned saw just God's face. Defervent. But someone stuck in negativity, the evil whisperer's friend, just can't see it. What causes that shift?
It's fundamentally about perception, isn't it? And Rumi says it's driven by love. He's quite clear. If you've an opening in your heart, you'll see the sun's bright rays wherever you may be. In everything, God can be seen through love. It's not like God suddenly appears out of nowhere. It's that your inner eye opens and you perceive the divine presence that's already everywhere. It's a perception born of love, really, not just thinking about it.
And the analogy he uses is so simple, so vivid. If you place fingertips upon each eye, can you see anything at all? Don't lie. He says the world's still there. Though you can't see things, they all still exist. The fault lies curled inside yourself's tight fist. It's our own blockage.
Exactly. Rumi puts the responsibility right back on us. It's not about waiting for the world to change. It's about our own internal blocks. Just lift the fingers from your eyes to then observe whatever you should want again.
Hmm.
And then that profound statement, a man's his eye, he's mere skin otherwise, for the beloved's only seen by eyes, meaning our true essence. What makes us human is our capacity for clear sight, for perception, and especially for love. The actionable bit here is your view of reality is shaped by your inner state. Change that state and you change what you see.
Okay, so the messenger hears all this about Omar, about true vision, and he just transforms. He leaves his horse, his stuff, searches like a madman for Omar. Rumi says, such seekers always in the end succeed. He just has to find him.
Exactly. And when he finds Omar, it's not in a palace. He's sleeping, no weapons, under a tree,
Yeah.
described as God's shadow. And the site just throws the emissary into these contradictory states as love and awe. It's a paradox. He's physically shaking with fear, but also filled with this incredible bliss, like the sun.
And his internal thoughts are amazing. He contrasts how brave he is in battle, facing lions. He thinks he's the bravest, but then says, the awe of this man's robbed me of my wits. This warrior is completely undone by Omar's simple presence.
And what's key is his realization. He gets it. This isn't just fear of another person. It's awe of God, not just a human being. And this leads to that powerful lesson from Rumi. Whoever's path is fear of God will find that he is feared by jinn and all mankind. Now, this fear isn't about being terrified. It's deep reverence, spiritual awe. And that commands respect, naturally, from everyone, everything. So Rumi's teaching is, like, true power comes from aligning with the divine. You earn respect through reverence, not by force.
And when Omar wakes up, his first words are just, don't fear. Why say that to someone who's overwhelmed? Not really by normal fear, but by this divine awe.
Well, Rumi gives us this really subtle but important lesson about fear itself. Omar says, don't fear, for scared men is quite suitable, but not for those who aren't afraid at all. The emissary's fear wasn't ordinary fear. It was awe, recognizing something sublime. So Omar wasn't just calming him down. He was helping a troubled heart to find abundant happiness and peace of mind. He did this by sharing these deep subtleties about God's attributes. He's guiding him beyond that initial shock of awe towards a deeper peace, the insight. There's worldly fear, and then there's spiritual awe. And that awe, when you understand it, actually leads to peace.
Okay, and as part of sharing these subtleties, Omar brings up this really fascinating distinction in Sufi thought, the difference between states and stations. What's that about?
Ah, yes, this is a really key concept in Sufism. Think of a state, a hal in Arabic, as like a temporary flash of spiritual insight, a beautiful glimpse, like seeing a bride unveiled for a moment. But a station, a maqam, is more like a permanent dwelling place in that truth. It's lasting. It becomes part of who you are. As Rumi puts it through Omar, the state is the unveiling of the bride, the station's being alone with her inside. He explains, her unveiling seen by every guest. Lots of people might get those flashes, those states. But with the groom alone, the bride will rest. Few reach the stations, that permanent, intimate union. The takeaway is, yeah, those spiritual moments are great, but the real journey is about cultivating a lasting connection, moving from glimpses to actually living it.
And this journey, it sounds like it's not quick. Omar teaches about the journey of the soul, spiritual traveling to the furthest goal, even the time which stands beyond all time. It sounds vast.
It is vast. It highlights that the spiritual path is this profound, ongoing evolution. Lifelong, really. And Omar's discernment is important here, too. He saw the emissary was ready, right? A friend who desired to comprehend, a student keen. He knew he could sow good seed in soil he knew was good, which underlines, the importance of readiness in the seeker and the teacher-student connection.
So the emissary, clearly ready, asks another huge question. How spirit came down to the ground? How did that bird become caged in a cell? Basically, why are we here? Why are souls and bodies?
And Rumi's answer, through Omar, is quite mystical. He says God chanted to the soul a spell. This spell isn't like hocus pocus. It's the divine creative power. The word, the command that brings things into being, animates everything.
Right, and Rumi gives these beautiful examples of the spell working everywhere. The rose smiled once, he chanted to its stem. His spell has made a stone turn to a gem. Bodies transformed to souls. His words have also caused the sun to shine. It's this force behind all creation.
And then Rumi touches on human doubt relating to this divine power. He says God sometimes will chant a riddle in his ear, making us hesitate. Shall I obey or do the opposite? This isn't to trap us, but to encourage choice, discernment. To overcome that doubt, Rumi advises, put less cotton wool inside your ears to hear those riddles that the Lord will tell. which means basically quiet the mental noise, the worldly distractions to hear that deeper guidance. He makes a clear distinction. Spiritual ears and eyes transcend mere sense, while rational ones can only claim pretense. The nugget here is to get the really deep truths, you need to tune out the everyday logic sometimes and open up to spiritual ways of knowing.
Okay, another challenging idea Rumi tackles is this balance between divine compulsion and human free will. How can something feel like compulsion but also be divine?
Right, it's a paradox. But Rumi suggests that for those with an inner eye, what looks like compulsion from the outside is actually experienced as liberation, a profound union with the divine will, like a full moon in total union. It's not the blind compulsion of the ego. These souls who are aligned, they see hidden things and the future, so their compulsion feels like flowing with the divine, not being forced by it.
And he uses those great analogies again. Drops turn to pearls inside an oyster shell, blood turning to musk in the deer, copper turning to gold through alchemy. How do these connect to us?
They're all about transformation, potential. He even brings it down to earth with bread. Simple, inanimate bread becomes a living part inside your gut because of your soul's power. And if our soul can do that, he asks, imagine the power of God who rules the soul. Our heart, he says, not just our physical body, can do amazing things, splits rocks, lifts mountains, echoing God splitting the moon. He's encouraging us to lift the cover of this mystery, to recognize our own soul's power and potential and let it seek God's throne. The insight is that our own soul has this incredible transformative ability, which points towards God's even greater power and our capacity to connect with it.
That connects really well to the next big lesson, the story of Adam and Satan. Both messed up, but their reactions were totally different. What's the teaching there?
It's a stark contrast, yeah.
Yeah.
Satan lies, blames God, you led astray, tries to hide his own part. Adam, however, confesses we've wronged ourselves. Even knowing on some level it's all God's manifestation, Adam takes responsibility. Why? Out of respect, he said it was his sin. That humility, that respect is crucial.
And God's question back to Adam is fascinating. Didn't I create that crime in you? Wasn't it all because of my decree? Why did you take responsibility? Adam's answer is simple but deep. Through fear, I kept respect for you.
Exactly. And the lesson Rumi draws, whoever shows respect, respect will meet. It teaches the huge value of humility, reverence, and taking personal accountability. Even within a bigger divine picture, it's about our attitude, our integrity. It's like that choice we all face when we slip up, blame game or own it. Rumi clearly favors owning it, respectfully. He then revisits the free will idea with another analogy. Think about the shaking hands of someone who's ill versus hands you shake deliberately. Both movements are ultimately created by God, sure, but sick men can't be blamed, while intentional actions carry responsibility. Intention matters. Then he distinguishes between the cleverness of the intellect, calls it a fox that can mislead, and true spiritual quests, which are on a whole different level.
And he gives the example of Omar versus Buhakam, or Abu Jahl. Omar chose soul, Buhakam chose intellect, and ended up the most ignorant man inwardly. What does that tell us about relying only on logic?
It tells us that pure logic has its limits. Rumi says logic's quarrels disappeared like night when the soul's light shone. Real understanding, deep wisdom, it comes from that inner light, the soul's illumination. Not just clever arguments or proofs. Intellect is useful, sure, but it needs guidance from the soul's wisdom. Otherwise, like the fox, it can lead you astray. The nugget. Don't rely only on intellect. True wisdom needs the soul's light.
Okay, circling back to the main story, Rumi reminds us of that verse. He is with you wherever you may be. What does understanding that really bring?
Well, it means that with knowledge, with awareness, his palace we have found. We realize that connection. But without it, if we're ignorant, it feels like a jail, a prison. We feel separate. But the truth is we're always connected. Asleep or awake, weeping or laughing, whether we're showing his anger or his love, it's all reflecting the divine in some way. It all points back to unity. Rumi asks, what's straight apart from one? There's only one ultimate reality.
And this leads the emissary to his final, really deep question for Omar. Why are pure beings in a filthy spot? Why are pure souls stuck in bodies made of water and clay? Rumi uses the image. Pure water gets kind of hidden or lost when it's sprayed on ground, and pure souls and bodies likewise have been bound.
Omar's response is profound. He basically tells the emissary that by even asking, he's trapped the wind inside a word. Some truths are just too big for simple explanations. He points out, the one from whom all benefits arise can surely see what you've seen with your eyes, meaning God, the source of everything good, definitely has a purpose we can't fully grasp. There are, he says, 1,000,000 benefits to the soul and body situation, way beyond what we can figure out.
Which leads to a call for gratitude, not complaint. If talking has no value, speak no more. Or else give thanks, don't be so mean and sore.
It's a strong message. To thanks, to place a halter around your neck. It's about willing submission, accepting divine will, not fighting it. That vinegar analogy is great too. Even something that seems sour like our struggles or limitations can become a healing brew with sugar through divine intention and our acceptance. The soul being in the body isn't a mistake. It's purposeful. It's transformative. The key takeaway: practice gratitude. Trust that even challenges have a purpose, even if you can't see it yet.
And this whole incredible exchange culminates in this final, powerful piece of advice that just blows the messenger away. Let whoever wants to sit with God sit with the Sufis. And the messenger just loses it, lose self-control, completely dazed, raised to a higher state.
Yeah, it underlines the power of connecting with that living truth, often through spiritual guides or community. It sparks real transformation. Rumi piles on the metaphors for this change. A flood becomes the sea, the seed may grow to form a tree, bread comes alive, wax and timber become so bright. They all show this amazing potential for enlightenment, for becoming something more when you connect with divine truth.
Which brings us to that beautiful concluding line for our deep dive today. Happy the man who from himself is free and joins with being in true unity. That feels like the ultimate destination Rumi points towards.
It absolutely is. That's the goal. But Rumi adds a crucial warning right after. Alas, the one who mixes with the dead, he'll die himself because he's been misled. He's stressing how important it is to seek living spiritual truth, real guidance, not just dead ideas or bad company. And he suggests reading the Quran to connect with the souls of the prophets, calling them fish in the sea of divinity. But just reciting isn't enough. You have to accept it, engage with it, let it transform you. Don't just turn them down, metaphorically speaking.
Wow. What a journey through just these parts of Rumi's Masnavi. We went through ancient poetry, but found so many deep and really usable lessons for today. This deep dive hopefully gives you not just information, but real inspiration too.
Definitely. And maybe something for you to carry forward from this is, how can you in your own life lift those fingers from your eyes? How can you start seeing that palace of spiritual truth in places you didn't expect? How do you cultivate that inner eye Rumi keeps talking about?
Exactly. Great questions to ponder. Keep exploring, keep asking, keep learning. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. And as always, thank you for being part of our last minute lecture family.